am coming to you from Rochester, Massachusetts, where it's a rainy day, so hopefully the lighting is fine. You can see me here. I put an extra lamp. I'm speaking to you about school visits because it's something I care very much about. I first started doing webinars and workshops on the topic back in 2013. I come to this topic, as Jennifer mentioned, as a teacher, curriculum developer, but also I have been the chairperson of the school committee in my town, and I was the PTO person at my kids' school who hired authors and illustrators to come to our school. So I know from that perspective what worked for me as a volunteer looking to hire people. So I bring all of that to the webinar today, which means it's packed. I'm going to do my best to answer your questions. Hopefully you'll get your questions answered right in the content of the webinar, but there'll be time for that at the end as well. So just a quick review of what we're going to talk about today. Slides will not move forward. Jennifer, sorry, my slides will not progress. There we go. Okay. So topics we're going to talk about today. First of all, should you connect your program to standards? Like, is that necessary for you as an author or illustrator? And if you should, how do you do that? And then the next thing is, how can you work to your strengths? That's something that's very important to me, that authors and illustrators come to the school visits thinking about what they bring to the table, not trying to live up to someone else's expectations of what they should do. What if you're an introvert at heart? Many of us are. And so the idea of talking to a group may be overwhelming. So we'll talk about that. And how do you get the kids' attention and keep them engaged through a program? How do you get the jobs? How do you get the word out about yourself to get hired in the first place? How much should you charge? This is one that's always asked. And so I have a couple of slides to show you. I did a survey with a friend, and we have real data to share with you today. And then, as we mentioned, the Q&A. Oops, sorry. Let me say something about this next slide before I go forward. It's very text heavy, and I promise all of my slides are not this way. But I have a quotation for you from Matthew Winner, who is a children's teacher librarian in Maryland and has a podcast called, change the name. The Children's Book Podcast is the name of his podcast now. But this is a quotation from him from a few years back, and I'm using it with his permission. It's long, which is why I put the text, because I know I comprehend better if I can read something long and hear it versus just hear it. So feel free to look aside if you prefer to just listen. That's fine too. Matthew said, it's really hard to know who I should invest my money and time in as a school librarian, because money and time are two commodities that we do not have a lot of to go around. So I don't want to bring an author into my school if I don't know that it's going to be a good investment. It's not enough to just like somebody's book. I need to know that when you talk to my kids, you're going to inspire these readers, and you're going to know how to engage a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old, and I would add a high school kid if that's what you're doing, any age. That you're not going to just market your book to my kids, rather you're going to want to be a part of our day. It all comes down to relationships. I can't overstate how important it is to build an authentic relationship. Again, so that's Matthew Winner. I quoted him directly, except for I edited out a few ums and ahs because it was taken from a podcast, and when we speak, we often do that. And I used it with permission from him. In case you're interested, it's from the podcast, back when his podcast was called Let's Get Busy, back March 31st, 2015 interview he did with Michelle Eastman. So the point of this is you want to go to schools because you want to connect with kids. You want to connect with your readers and get to know them and build relationships with them. Don't plan to do school visits because you want to go and pitch your books and market books. That's not a good reason to go. That might be a nice side benefit, but that can't be the reason for it. It really needs to be about the kids, because that's why we are writing books for kids in the first place. Okay, so really we're here back to this idea of engagement and connection. And I'd like you to just take a moment and think about a couple of questions. I'll just pause momentarily while you get some ideas in your mind. But why do you write or illustrate books for kids or young adults? Why have you chosen that? What do you love about writing or illustrating, or what's your favorite part? Like, what's the thing you love the most? Like, maybe it's, oh, research is fantastic, or I love the first draft, or making thumbnails, or revising. What do you most love about this job? And think more broadly than just the writing, what are your passions in this life? Like, what are the things you care about outside of writing? You know, topics or themes, things that come up often. So just take a moment, think about those 3 ideas. Have a few things in mind before I go forward. Okay, this is hard on a webinar because normally I'd ask people to share. I would have asked you to take a few minutes and jot things down. I hope you have something in mind here. And the reason I'm asking is I want you to think about developing programs that suit you, that are personal to you and who you are as a presenter. What do you have to offer? What do you bring to the table that isn't necessarily the same thing as what you offer as an author or an illustrator? I mean, who are you as a human in front of people? And you want to think about writing an elevator pitch for yourself. We're all taught to write the elevator pitch for our books, but write a pitch for yourself. The couple sentences like, why me? Why do you want me to come to your school? What makes you unique? What are you bringing to the table? So, are you funny or serious or thoughtful, reflective? Are you childlike? Are you more academic? Are you a scientist? And also, what kind of groups would you work best with? Are you thinking 25 kids tops, or 50 or 100 or 500? What feels comfortable to you? If you are terrified of a room of 500 people, then maybe that's not a good place to start. I would say it isn't a good place to start. Eventually, maybe you get there, but think about the kind of program that's going to be great for you and for the kids you're going to visit. Okay, so let's talk about standards for a minute. Standards, you've all heard Common Core or the CCSS, or maybe you've heard about the Next Generation Science Standards, which are the standards for science. Standards tell what kids need to know, and educators decide how to go about teaching that content. So if you wanted to address standards, there are ways you can do that. I'm not suggesting that you want to try to take on the role of the teacher. That's the teacher's job. But your programs can dovetail with what is already happening in the classroom. And guess what? If you're an author, what you do is in the standards. Your passion is in the standards. Your work is there because there are standards about revising, drafting, researching. All of those things are in the standards. So regardless of whether you choose to actually cite the standards on your materials and say what you're going to do, you are in fact going to be addressing them. So I kind of feel like, why not cite them? Because it helps people hire you. For example, when I was doing that job, I came to that position as a teacher. I already knew the curriculum, I knew the standards, so I could pick out from someone's materials what standards they would be addressing. But oftentimes, the people in those roles are parents who are not educators and don't know, or maybe they're just frazzled librarians who are doing this extra, or teachers who are volunteering their time to go hire you. If you make it easier for them to pitch your program and get the money they need, then that's a win-win for everybody. They can go and say the principal, if it's out of the budget, or school committee, or the PTO, this is why I want this person to come. We're going to address these standards. It fits perfectly with what I'm doing in my classroom or my library, and that's why we want them to come. It helps you. But don't get panicky if you feel like that is just more than I want to deal with. You don't have to do it because any skilled educator can immediately recognize how your program will fit. So I'm just a quick slide to tell you the ELA standards, I've already said this kind of, they focus on what you already do well because your passion is in those standards. You tell stories, you love words, you love pictures, you like to revise, all that's in the standards. And the Common Core standards cover 4 areas. They cover reading, writing, speaking and listening, and language. So it's possible that you could find standards in any of these 4 categories if you wanted to choose to address them. Okay, now a warning, this next slide coming up, oh no, I have one more, sorry, here we go. The College and Career Readiness Anchor Standards, they tell the expectations. So this is from the Common Core. What are the expectations for kids in that subject area? Now here's the next slide coming, is really hard to read. Now I'm putting it up here, and I'm put now at the beginning of our program because it takes a lot of attention, I think, to follow along, and I want to catch you while you're fresher. But also I want to point out that even though the Common Core content, the actual pages can be kind of overwhelming visually, I'm going to show you how to read them. And it's not as bad as it actually seems upon first glance. So this is a page taken right out of the Common Core standards. That red box is obviously something I've laid on top of it, but there's a ton of information here. It's a visually, I think, it's too much. But I want you to focus in right here. The heading in red at the top says College and Career Readiness Anchor Standards for Reading. So these are the 10 anchor standards for reading. There are 10 for language, writing, speaking, those things I told you earlier. Let's just take a look at this. If you look under key ideas and details, the piece that I boxed out, this is a specific standard that kids will have to address. Read closely to determine what the text says explicitly and to make logical inferences from it. Cite specific textual evidence when writing or speaking to support the conclusions drawn from the text. So in other words, read something, make some inferences, and then tell why you made that inference. Where did you get that from? That's the big standard. Now that's the overarching standard for this. I'm going to click to the next slide, which comes behind this one in the document. This shows you what each grade level has to do to meet that standard. So here again, try to just stick with me in the red boxes. Kindergartners will, with prompting and support, ask and answer questions about key details in a text. And then first grade, ask and answer questions about key details in the text. So the first kindergartners are prompted, first graders do it independently, and now second graders will ask and answer such questions as who, what, where, when, why, and how to demonstrate understanding of key details in the text. So each of these is building to get to that standard I just showed you a minute ago. You do this in kindergarten, this in first grade, this in second grade, moving on in third grade, in fourth grade, in fifth grade. Running right across the top, number one, that's what you do for each grade level. We don't need to read all this, please don't try, it's a lot. But I just want to point out, if you're not an educator, it might be useful to look at this document and read down a column. So let's say you're going to a grade 4 classroom for a school visit. You could read the column down the middle just as a way to understand where fourth graders should be. What are they working toward? So the column of fourth grade means this is what kids are expected to be able to do at the end of fourth grade. So again, maybe if you're there in September, you might even just read the third grade column because that will be what they would have mastered before they see you. But it'll give you a good sense of what to expect if you don't have a lot of access to kids in an educational setting. You could do this for reading, writing, speaking, listening. Each grade you could read down the column if that's useful to you. Do you need to study and know these? No. That's the teacher's job, so don't get too bogged down in all of that content. Okay, give me just a moment here. Right. Now here's an example. This is my book, and I'm going to show you 2 ways I could cite standards from my book if I would like to. One standard I could address is reading number 6, which says, assess how point of view or purpose shapes the content and style of a text. I especially want you to latch on to this idea of point of view. I'm going to show you the opening page of my book. Imagine you're the pilot of Alvin, a deep-sea submersible barely big enough for 3. So right off there, you can see it's in second person point of view. That's an unusual choice. I could build a whole program around how I choose point of view, how I made this decision, what led to this decision making. For example, many writers start in first person and then kick it to third to test it out, or maybe move it from third to first, or third omniscient, or third close. You could bring in examples of your own work and show what those looked like, especially with older children. In kindergarten, 1, first and second, it would be too much. But anyone from 3rd, 4th, 5th grade and up, it would be a valuable exercise to see how you moved from one point of view to another. And you would be directly addressing a standard, and you just automatically do that as a writer anyway. Therefore, you're like I said, you're addressing the standard. Here's another example. Reading number 4, interpret words and phrases as they are used in text, including determining technical, connotative, and figurative meanings, and analyze how specific word choices shape meaning or tone. So I'd like you to key in here on this idea of the technical language and word choices shaping meaning or tone. These are things that are specifically really strongly focused on in my book. So here's an example. Lower yourself through Alvin's hatch. Flip on oxygen. Psst. Switch on carbon dioxide scrubber. Zzz. 2 scientists squeeze between gear. You stand and seal the sphere, silencing the world outside. Call Atlantis. Hatch is shut. You get a lot here around word choice. You can see there's a lot of alliteration. There's a little bit of rhyme. It is not a rhyming book, but there are occasional rhymes or internal rhymes. And then this last sentence just hints at what's to come on the next page. Hatch is shut. This is technical language. It is very specific. They follow the same language every time they go on a dive. So the next page has back and forth between the launch coordinator and the Alvin pilot. So I could talk about technical language used on Alvin. So those are two examples, quick examples pulled from my book. Maybe you have some in mind now of your own already. So the next thing is this idea of presenting to the kind of person you are. I want you to work to your strengths. And it's not a secret that many book creators tend to be introverted or maybe ambiverted, maybe not fully extroverts. And so maybe the idea of school visits are challenging for you. If this describes you, as I suggested, maybe avoid the whole school visit for now and think about that in the future if you get comfortable. I put this book up here because Susan Cain has done a TED Talk on the topic. This is her book. There is also a book on the topic for students, young adults, and it really gets into, are you an introvert or an extrovert or an ambivert, and how does that manifest in your energy levels and so forth. And typically, a really shorthand version of introvert, extrovert is extroverts tend to get energy from being in crowds with people, and introverts tend to get energy from being alone or quiet. That's a way oversimplification, but that's an important point. If you're an introvert, going to school, interacting with kids and teachers all day long, you will be exhausted at the end of the day. So how will you plan for that in your programming? I want you to think about that. And think of it this way too. If you're an introvert, there are kids in front of you who are introverts. So don't come into this thinking you need to be a showman or showwoman or making a big performance. You bring yourself to the school visit. I want you to find your presenter's voice as a person and work to your own passions and interests. Here are some examples I want to show you. So I have a bunch of examples of actual authors and illustrators who've done school visits. There are some slides here, some pictures of kids to show you them at work. And I'm going to talk about what those authors and illustrators did, depending on how that suits their personalities. So Melissa Stewart is a science writer for children, and these two slides were taken when she did a visit that I was part of. And the thing you probably noticed right away is you don't see Melissa Stewart in the slide. That's because she does describe herself as an introvert, and she works to her strengths by putting the kids at the focus, or sometimes the kids' work, the kids' writing. In this instance, this is an activity she does with her program, A Place for Birds, and another book called Feathers, Not Just for Flying, where kids are comparing their arm spans to the spans of birds' wingspans, and that plastic bag on the left, the kid's holding, is about the weight of bird. That's the weight of a specific bird. And the finger that's pointing, that's Melissa's hand. But really the focus is on the kids here. She also does a hands-on writing workshop where students add voice and revise their nonfiction writing samples that they have written in advance. And Melissa shares her own writing samples and samples of other authors to illustrate her points. Both kids and teachers love this program. It addresses standards, and it really works to the way that it suits Melissa's personality perfectly. Another one, Andrea Aloni. She's the author of the new book, Bunny Bear, and Take a Picture of Me, James Vanderzee. I think that's the right title. She identifies as an introverted extrovert, and she says she can have fun with large or small groups, but she especially likes small ones because she connects with the kids more. And there's that connecting with kids idea again. She says that student participation is always a must. Props and activities give kids a hands-on connection, and she does use a slideshow when possible. But when it's not possible, she just gets down and sits with the kids like on the floor here and engages with them directly. Another cool thing is she said, I made a Spotify station for both of my books, so sometimes I play those during the signings. I think that's a fun idea for those of you who have those kinds of lists. You might share them with kids. Just a quick aside here. Many authors or illustrators who visit schools offer a small gift by way of thank you for the person who organized the program. This isn't necessary, but the folks who do this are generally volunteers who are not being paid for their time, and they're spending a lot of time organizing and scheduling school visits in a school, and for a school is in itself a challenging exercise. So if you are able, some small gift for them a copy of your book or a copy of a print or a postcard, something like that to say thank you. Even just a handwritten note would go a long way to letting that person know they're appreciated for their hard work. Okay, next slide here. We have Laurie Griffin Burns, who is another science writer who writes for young children right through middle schoolers. And she describes herself as more introverted than some, but she's able to channel her extroverted self, her inner extrovert. But she knows her limits. She runs sessions for up to 50 kids only 3 presentations in a day, and she works in a book signing if wanted and lunch with students if the school wants that. But she will not do more than 3, and she will not have more than 50 because she knows that's what's best for her program. The key here is you want to leave them wanting more. You want to impress them and wow them. You don't want them to be seeing you when you're tired. So if you can't manage 6 presentations in a day, which I think is crazy, don't try to do that. Don't let yourself get talked into doing that many presentations. Only do the number that you can manage. Just a quick aside here about this. After this program, a bunch of kids connected with Laurie by email because she had done a program about citizen scientists, and she talked about frog watch, and some kids found a frog and couldn't identify it, so they were taking pictures and sending her emails, and they had this great back and forth after the fact that Laurie loved and the kids loved too. So it's kind of a fun thing that happened. Kevin Hawkes is an illustrator, and he has a great sense of humor. He appears to me to be a little more introverted, but he puts his art as the focus of his program. We'll talk about his studio. He shows slides of his really colorful space where he works. He shows his journals. And then he does a drawing exercise, as you can see, or many of them, where he brings kids up and has them engage with him. Sometimes he has them draw a squiggly line, and then he has to stand back and examine it and turn it into a piece of art. Sometimes they call things out to him, but he shows them little tips and strategies. And often they're just sitting there like, wow. That slide at the beginning of the little girl, she was watching this presentation at the time. She was really hooked and interested in him. Another side note here, he does loads of sketches. You can see in the picture on the right, he just sketches. He leaves everything with the school when he's done. And for those of you who might be illustrators or author illustrators, if you are able to do this, here's a really great tip for you. If you make something that you want to take along because you're like, ooh, I found a new character, like, don't leave that behind. But if you don't need those sketches, leave them. Sign them and leave them. 2 of the things he left behind are now hanging in the school library, and the rest of them, this was his idea, were auctioned off to raise money, and the money that was raised went straight back into hiring other authors and illustrators the following school year. I thought that was incredibly generous on his part, and it went a long way to helping us keep funding our program. So if you're able to do something like that, it's a really nice thing to offer. It doesn't cost you anything, and you've already made those sketches right there if that's the kind of program you're doing. If you're an author, perhaps you could leave behind signed bookmarks or a signed copy of a book and say you could use this for some kind of a gift basket or raffle basket or something that the school might do. If you are able and inclined to do so, it's a nice way to support a school's program that doesn't cost a lot of money. Here's Sara LV. She writes nonfiction. Well, she writes a lot of things, but most of her school visits that she does are based around her nonfiction programs for hilarious books on, she looks at history through a single lens. So one of her most recent ones is about poison, history through poison, which is quite funny, or through clothing. So the slide on the right is based on her book, Why Did They Wear That? So she's dressing the student up in clothing of the time period she's talking about. Sara is the master of props. She uses props beautifully. Like, I always see her posting things and I hear people talking about her programs. They're really great. And Sara says, I'm one of those introverts who acts like an extrovert. I often feel shy and get stage fright, but it's selective. But once I'm in front of a bunch of kids, I'm not nervous anymore. And here's something that she told me that I thought I'd read for you directly. As for how I work my visits, I know that what teachers want me to address is pedagogical stuff like craft, revision, research, and other Common Core standards, things, but that the kids want to be entertained. I used to actively sense my audience air deflate a little when I moved from fun stuff and now I'm going to talk about revision. Excuse me. So I've learned to intersperse the teacher-targeted items throughout an otherwise lively talk, punctuated frequently with fun facts, props, and volunteers. Also, given the nature of my topics, I'm fortunate that my research discussion really can be fun for kids to hear about. One of my more successful blunders is a recent tactic. I discuss how to sort note cards and organize and structure a piece of writing by using kid volunteers as my human note card. You can see them there all lined up in the bottom left slide. I hang the cards around their necks and literally shuffle kids around so students can see how I structured one of my biographies. A win-win, but it took some trial and error. So you can see she does small group, and then the top slide there, she does whole school presentations as well. She's comfortable moving between those different kinds of programs. Here's Debby Machiko Florence, and she told me that she's an introvert for the most part, but she's comfortable speaking in public because she used to be a teacher and a zoo educator. She thought that she would prefer smaller sessions at first, but then she realized over time when people started asking her to do bigger ones, she really was comfortable to do groups of up to 100 or maybe 120 actually now. So that's what she's been doing. Here's an interesting point about knowing yourself as a presenter. She said, when I used to do presentations when I was a zoo educator, I learned that I am most comfortable if I know the audience is not staring at me the whole time. So I use a PowerPoint presentation. The audience has something to look at other than me, and the slide reminds me what I want to talk about. I don't memorize it, though after giving it more than a few times, it becomes rote. So that's about knowing herself. Okay. Jennifer, something just dropped down, or if you're trying to communicate with me, I'm going to need you to hop in and speak to me because I can't see what it was, and if not, I'll just keep on going. Okay. Okay, my last example is Marty Kelley. Now, Marty Kelley, he's a fairly extroverted guy who is really a performer. He's hilarious. He cracks a lot of jokes. He gets the kids riled up, like seriously riled up. But the key is he used to teach second grade, and he knows how to bring them back down. If you don't know how to do that, don't let it get crazy and out of control because you'll never get him back. So keep this in mind. But he is hilarious and funny. It's another kind of program. His is a lot like a performance with a lot of interesting revision and writing and illustrating stuff worked into it. He has one basic program. That's it. He does the same program, slightly adjusted for different age levels, but the same basic program he does all year long. So if he comes to your school, let's say he came to your school in September and my school this month, we'd be seeing the same program. Then he redesigns that, I think, over the summer, and next year it'll be a whole new program. And each time it's usually tailored to whichever book he's launching that year. His programs are funny, people love them, kids love them, and he keeps getting called back. And he does like over 100 a year, I think, something like that. It's really, he loves working with the kids, he loves connecting with the kids, and it's a way for him. He said he pays his mortgage by doing school visits, which is something he needed to have happen to keep making a living as an author illustrator. Okay, so now I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I'm going to give you some very specific examples of what you might do. Here are some ideas. You could do a reader's theater. If you've never heard of reader's theater or skits, it's what it sounds like. Basically, kids read a script and use dramatic vocalizations, but there isn't a full play production. They're not putting on costumes and doing blocking and moving around and acting in that way. They're essentially standing in a line and reading dramatically. Kind of like a monologue in a way, except that each person has a role. So, but the delivery is like a monologue, I mean. If you're interested in doing something like this, I strongly encourage you to go to Melissa Stewart's website where she has some sample scripts from her books and some details about how you might structure those. Actually, she has lots of great stuff on her website, so you might want to go there. You could use a Q&A session in your program, although I caution you to limit this in K1 and 2 because what will happen is you'll say, does anybody have questions? And you'll see loads of hands, and you'll call in a kid and they'll say, the other day when I was at my grandma's house, blah, 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 blah. And then you'll get lots of kids telling you about their grandma's house too, or their dog or whatever the thing is. Kids at that age have a hard time recognizing the difference between questions and comments, or they just really want to tell you their thing, so they can't help themselves. Older students will be better at this. You could do some sort of demonstration. This might work well if you are doing science books, a demonstration, or an investigation. Although Sara LV's example with the note cards is an example of a demonstration where she's showing how she moved cards around. She's doing it in a really physical way. Or it could be some kind of scientific demonstration or investigation. You could make a straight up presentation, not unlike what I'm doing here, where you have PowerPoints and you talk about your process, something like that. You could do storytelling. Lots of people who are authors and illustrators also do storytelling as well. You could work that in where you're not looking at anything, you're just telling a story and engaging kids. You could do a photo essay. I saw a great program like this, Richard Sobel did. He's a photographer, and he was developing a new book that featured monkeys. I believe it was a village in Thailand. I think I have that right. And what he did was put together 2 series of photos. He showed series 1, and then he switched and he showed series 2. He was asking for kid input. Which did they like better? But the cool thing is that series 1 was like funny. The monkeys were doing silly things and they made the kids laugh. The other one was a little bit ominous, like foreboding, like, ooh, the monkeys are taking over the town. And he showed us very vividly how simply changing the images changed the entire feel of what he was doing. And that's a great exercise for any illustrator authors who might be in the group, something like that. You could do chanting where you engage them back and forth, or call and response, something like that. You could use props, as we've talked about, especially like the way Sara LV demonstrated for us. And you could do a revision strategies workshop, like I mentioned, that Melissa Stewart does. These are all possibilities, and there are many more. Oh, one last thing I want to say about this. If you're engaging kids in whatever way you're doing, it makes sense for you to get a handle on when are kids engaged and noisy, and when are they disengaged and noisy? Because kids are fidgety, noisy beings. Just because there's noise doesn't mean they're not engaged. Try to pay attention to other ways that people will convey they're engaged. Are they leaning in? Are they looking? Are they laughing? Are they poking their friend like, oh, that was great? Or are they poking their friend like, I'm being annoying right now? That's a whole different kind of thing. Try to get a sense of that, to know the difference between the two. And don't be agitated if possible when they're just being a little bit nudgy, but they're really into what you're doing, because especially little ones who are really into something can actually still be quite physical and verbalizing a lot. And that's actually a good thing if you can learn to recognize the difference. If you have trouble with that, I strongly encourage you to find some teachers in your life who could give you tips and help you recognize the difference. My classroom was always a really noisy place, but very actively engaged noisy. The tips for when you arrive. Just going to check my arrival tips. Clearly communicate your needs to your contact person in advance. So that means give them very clear guidelines. Establish in advance what's the schedule, who am I going to see at what time, how am I going to be paid, all of those things. I'm not going to get into all the nitty-gritty of contracts. Quite frankly, that's not my expertise area. But you want to make sure you have a clear outline of what's to happen. And clearly communicating regularly. So I strongly encourage you, and so does Sara LV. She in fact messaged me last week because she knew I was doing this. Contact the school 2 days in advance. 2 weeks out, checking in, 2 days out. Anything I need to know, anything happening. Because Sara did this just last week. I think it was last week. And a school said, oh, we've had to tweak the schedule a little. But the tweak was actually that her hour-long programs were cut to 40 minutes. That's fairly significant. And so knowing that in advance enabled her to go back and rethink her program and just make a quick adjustment for it. Hopefully that's not going to happen, but the fact is it does happen. So knowing it 2 days ahead is better than 20 minutes before you're supposed to start. This is a really important one. Wear clothes that make you feel comfortable, that feel like you. Wear comfortable shoes. You can't wear your yoga pants or your jammies. You can't wear your ripped jeans, but wear something you're comfortable in. Be neat and clean and put together, but you don't have to wear a dress or a suit or a tie or any of those things. They want to see the real you, and you're going to do a better job if you feel like yourself. And arrive expecting things won't go as expected. If they do, hooray! And you can be super surprised and excited, but expect it not to be perfect so that you won't be as frustrated. Things just happen. Things happen in schools. It's frustrating, but you have to learn to go with it. And oftentimes the person who's hiring you maybe is a parent volunteer, and they might think they have it all straightened out, and then it isn't for some reason outside of their control. So try to be kind and understanding, and, you know, don't be like a diva, you know, that phrase that we all know from people who are very, very demanding. Like, be clear about your expectations, but also be understanding when things don't go quite as planned. And arrive really early, at least 30 minutes if you can, more if it's possible. You can sit in the parking lot and read your book if you want or something, or just take some time to regroup. But it gives you time, and also get into the school so that, you know, when you get there and the secretary says, "I'm sorry, who are you? I didn't know you were coming today." Because it does happen sometimes, that you have time to look for them to figure it out and work it out. So do your best to get there early. Oh, I didn't want to go back to the shoes thing too. If you're presenting over multiple days, bring different shoes for each day, because you'll be surprised by how much your feet will hurt after standing all day in a school. They often have concrete under the carpeting or tile, and it's really hard on your feet and your body. So different shoes are a good idea. Okay, here are some other quick tips once you get into the room. Assess the room. Do you need to move anything around? You know, you're in someone else's space, so maybe you want to say, "Hey, can I move stuff around in this library?" But just because it's set a certain way doesn't mean you need to leave it that way if it doesn't work for you. You can say, "I think I'd like it better if I had a walkway here, or if this group moved over," or whatever the thing is. I know Kwame Alexander does this. He's talked about, he goes and just starts moving stuff around. Politely, with permission, of course, but feel free to make those adjustments if that will suit you better. When you start, tell the students the basic agenda. I do not mean put a poster up that says, like I did at the beginning for you all. I mean a quick, "Today we're going to have fun talking about how I made my first book," or "Today we're going to dig into how I researched my book." That's it, like quick and sweet. Just get them hooked in some way. And then you can use something funny to get their attention. Okay, like this could happen as they're entering the room if you have something just up on the projector, or it could happen once you officially start. You could use tell an interesting fact about yourself, like where you live or something like that, or tell a funny story. Or here's a good one: an embarrassing photo of yourself as a kid is always a winner. Like you with the dorky haircut or the weird pants or whatever the thing is for however old you are, something like that. Kids love it. If you're the age the kids are in front of you, even better. Or your pet, you have a pet, kids love pets. Or a photo of your workspace, like "This is where I spend my days." All of these things help them know you better as a human, and that helps them connect to you. One other thing I didn't remember to put on the slide, I just thought of it. When I was teaching, and also now as a presenter, I try to, if possible, be at the doorway and greet them as they come in. So in my classroom, for example, every kid had to interact with me one-on-one on the way in and on the way out every day. And that would be a high five, a handshake, a fist bump, whatever they want, every kid. Just stand there, "Hey, hey, hey, hey," as they come in the door. They will be like, "Oh, I touched the author, I'm so excited." But they have a connection with you now. And that goes toward the connecting, but also behavior. Once they feel connected and engaged with you, they're less likely to act out or be obnoxious because they know you now a little bit and they feel special because they do. So try something like that if you can. Okay. A few more things here that you can do once you're with kids. Think, pair, share. These are some strategies actually while you're in the room with the kids. Think, pair, share is a teacher strategy, which basically is you cannot call on every kid and have them share something out. So think, pair, share goes like this. How many of you have a pet at home? Would you turn and tell your neighbor about your pet really quickly? Tell the neighbor about the pet, and then the neighbors, like you can report for your neighbor. So no kid is telling about their own pet. Their partner tells you about their pet, and you can call on 1 or 2 or 3 kids. But everybody gets a chance to talk, okay? You have to do it quickly and really, like, don't let it go long and rein them right back to you, because it will just devolve into a lot of talking. But it's a way to give everybody a chance to be heard. Excuse me 1 second. Another thing is the connection sign. Many schools do this, but not all, but you could introduce it at the beginning of your program if you wanted to. And it's like this. You put your hands this way and you go like this. And basically what it means is, if a kid in the audience is talking, and let's say they tell you a story about something funny their dog did, you can go like that to them. And it means, me too. I'm connected. I have a story like that. And that's it. They don't have to verbalize it. So you see, the first time I thought to share this with authors is when I saw kids doing it to an author. Like, the whole room was just like, they're going like this. And the author was like, I don't know what's happening right now. And the teacher shared it, thankfully. And I thought, that's a great thing to introduce. You can say, if you have a connection with something I'm telling you, just go like that. And then you just nod at the kid. And then there's another connection, like, all right, I see that we're connected, but you don't have to tell me the story about it. You can use dipsticking, which goes something like this. Raise your hand if you have ever been to Florida. Or put your hand on your head if you've ever been to Florida. Or give me a thumbs up if you've ever been to Florida. Whatever the funny thing is, you can tell them to be like silly. Put your elbow in your ear, I think is something Marty Kelley did once as a joke. Like something like that, but they can all give you feedback without everybody having to talk to you. And practicing wait time is really important. This means when you talk, if you're asking for kids to respond to you, if you ask a question, ask it, and then count to 3 in your head, not out loud. Just kind of go 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, then call on somebody. This allows for the introverts in the room or the kids who are a little slower to come up with an answer to have a chance to formulate what they want to say and actively engage with you. So it's not only the noisy kids getting heard in the program. Again, getting them involved, like we saw with Sara LV, volunteers. If you're going to ask for volunteers, I strongly advise you to be clear about what they're volunteering to do. So if you're going to be dressing them up in 16th century clothing, tell them that's what you're going to be doing before they come up to the front. Sara LV does that. Marty Kelley does that. He's really goofy and embarrasses kids, but he tells them, I'm going to embarrass you. Only come up here if you want to be embarrassed. I'm going to draw a silly caricature of you. He's really, really clear about that, so that kids know what they're getting into. And you'll get more participants that way, not just the goofy extroverted kids. Okay, switching gears now quickly, and we're getting toward the end. What about your website and how do you get people to come to hire you? You need a clear and inviting website with all of your information on it. Succinct workshop descriptions. Think of your query letters for your books. 2-3 sentences tops, tell them what it's going to be, unless it's some really complex thing, but it's rare that you can't pare it down. Keep it simple. If they want to know more, they'll ask you. Okay, tell your fees. I feel very strongly about this one. Other people have differing opinions, so you're hearing mine. I say this as someone who used to hire people. I don't have time to email you back and forth to figure out what your fees are. And often, if I don't see your fees on your website, I'm assuming you're too expensive and I can't afford you. But also, even if I can afford you, let's say your day rate is $2,500 a day, and I only have 1,000. Even if your website says my rates are flexible, I'm open to negotiation. If you start from 25 and I start from 1,000, we're never going to meet, and it's a waste of time for me and for you to have to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth about that. Nearly everybody who hires authors and illustrators to come is a volunteer of some sort, either a librarian or teacher or principal doing it outside of their normal responsibilities, or a parent like me who's doing the work. Please just put it on the website, because many people missed out on me hiring them potentially because I just clicked away because I didn't know how much they charged and I didn't have time. You can put pictures of school visits to entice people, what you've done before, but just keep in mind you cannot put the faces of children, or you should not put the faces of children without permission. So a way around that is to have someone shoot from the back of the room and get the backs of kids' heads but the front of you, or get you from the side but not anybody's faces. Or you can, if you know how, blur out their faces if you have an actual photo of a kid face. You could include a video of you in action, or you could take stills and turn them into a video. A reason you might want to do that is that increases your search engine optimization, and you might get more hits on your website. You could include testimonials from past schools. Keep it simple, not too many. I don't need to see 25. Pick your best ones. Like if this were going on the, like think of your book, the blurb for your book, right? What's the best ones what best things people said about your book? Think of it like this. Snip the best and put those on your website. I don't need to read 25. Include links to positive press. If you've been in the paper, have a section where you include that information. Whether it's for school visits or something else, include that. It helps them know you and how you interact. Here's a final one. I haven't done this yet, and I aspire to do this. Marty Kelley puts his calendar on his website, and he told me he does that as a JPEG. So he said he makes a calendar, does file save as, or maybe a PDF, and then he just uploads it as an image file. So the first time I hired him, I could go to his website and see when he was available. So then I simply email, hey, Marty, I'd like to hire you for June 3rd. And he says, great, here's the contract. And we go from there. If you're able to do that, it saves you and the person hiring so much time because you don't have to email back and forth trying to nail down a date. The author says, how about here? No, how about here? How about it can go on forever trying to find a date. So it's a quick way to do it. I have not done it yet, but it's going to be on mine. It will be there once I figure out exactly how to do it. Okay, getting gigs. We're almost to the end here. Here's the thing. You need a great program. Just like everyone tells writers, you need to write a great book. That's more important than the publicity stuff. You need a great program. You need to have a great program and you need to get people to tell others you have a great program. Just like the kidlit world, everybody knows everybody. It's the same with teachers and librarians. Everybody knows everybody. They're going to spread the word for you if you do a great job. But the other things you can do, here are some things that may help that along. Contact schools, especially PTOs and PTAs, at least in the Northeast, that's a common thing. To go to PTO and PTA, ask them to fund you. And how do you do that? Well, send an enticing postcard or an email with your website and contact information. Again, simple, simple. Don't put everything in your email. Don't tell them everything you offer. They're not going to read it. I literally, when I got stuff in the mail, I would stand over the recycle bin and toss stuff in. That was too long. I feel terrible saying it because I'm like the editors on the other end who you got to grab them in the first couple pages or whatever. It's like that. I have limited time. So I'm looking for something that's enticing that makes you go, ooh, that's interesting. And then I'll go to your website later. And that's more and more true. Like, parents now are younger than me. They're all online. They're going to go look you up online. You don't have to send big brochures and flyers. That's my opinion again. Some have differing ones, but that's how I did it as someone who hires. Ask schools to invite the press. When you're at their school, get the press to come. I know of an author who was hired because some tiny, tiny little newspaper came to our school, wrote about it, and then that school called me. Another school called me and asked about the person, the author, and then she got a job. Cultivate relationships. Maintain an email list. You have an email, you've booked stuff with them, maintain an email list through something like MailChimp or Tiny Letter if that's still around, where people can easily unsubscribe. But then each year you can send an email out and say, I'm booking for next year, and if you book me now, you can lock in my 2018 rates, for example. Collect positive feedback and use it on your site, as I mentioned. Ask them to recommend you to other schools. Say, hey, if you love my program, would you tell somebody else about me, please? Ask if they'll serve as a reference. I think that's kind of obvious based on what I've said. And then post-visit, you yourself can send photographs to the newspaper if your school rep person doesn't. Tiny papers, local papers are looking for content. You're not going to get paid for it most likely, but getting your picture in the local paper then gets it on the internet. And then again, once it's on the internet, people find you and they say, wow, look at that great thing that author did at that school in whatever town, and they can contact you from there. And another thing is presenting at conferences and meetings like the International Literacy Association or like Connecticut Reading Association. You can go big like NCTE. That's a national conference, but sometimes these local ones actually will serve you better because authors tend to do most of their visits in the town around where they live because it's the least expensive way to do it. You don't have to be paid to travel. So you might get more that way. Okay, now what to charge? I think this is important to keep in mind. If you work too little, you devalue everyone. David Stemple said that to his daughter, Heidi Stemple. Heidi Stemple is Jane Yolen and David Stemple's daughter, obviously. He said that to her. I think it's important. I feel very strongly that authors and illustrators should be compensated for their time. They should be paid for school visits. If you are in a school, you're not home writing or illustrating more work. You have to spend hours prepping your presentations. You maybe are exhausted the day after a presentation and lose more work time. You should be paid. Okay, so what's that look like? Jeanette Bradley and I just did a survey. We just, in the month of March, there was a whole initiative called Kidlit Women, looking to compare things in the industry, gender imbalances in the industry. So that was the primary impetus for us doing this survey. We looked at what do authors and illustrators make, and then we dug deeper to find out, are there differences based on gender, based on race, ethnicity, etc. The survey was open from March 15th until March 31st. We're in the analyzing data phase now. I have some early charts to show you. These have been all checked through, but I encourage you to go to my website. The posts will be coming soon. So first, here's the average charge for a full day visit by region. This is based on people who charge. There were a fair number of people who say they do them for free. We dropped them out of this data set because they were skewing the data low. So people who charge, this is the average. In the Midwest, it's $840 a day. In the Northeast, it's $1,122 per day. In the South, $883. In the West, $955. And overall average is $982 a day. There were some people who charge quite high and some who charge lower. These are averages. So now I'm going to show you the breakdowns. This is a full day rate, breakdowns of who's charging what amount, okay? 8%, this includes the no charge, we're charging nothing. But if you look to the middle bars here, the largest number of people are charging somewhere between $500 and $1,000 a day. Sorry, $1,250 a day, excuse me. That's where the largest breakdown falls. And the ones that are on the higher end tend to be people who were award-winning, many starred reviews, things like that. I can't say any more details than that because we're literally flushing this out right now. We hope to have one blog post on my website by Friday. That's a big goal. It might be Monday by the time we get it there. But if you really want to make sure you get this information, you can subscribe on my website, which that's going to come up on a slide in a moment. There will be at least 2 blog posts. The first post is just a breakdown of general information like this. There's another that will look at gender and race and ethnicity that will be coming further on. So there'll be multiple posts. So if you really want to make sure you get this information, I encourage you to subscribe so you won't miss it, or just make a note in your calendar to go check my website for that information. Here's my website at the bottom of the slide, michellecusolito.com. And then the final thing I'll say before questions is I moderate a Facebook group. This is the full extension of it, or you can just go to Facebook and search on Create Engaging School Visits. There are, I don't know, maybe 800 of us in there, something like that. It started after my first workshop and more people have been joining, and you can post questions, share ideas, say, oh my gosh, what do I do about this problem? Or people ask for tech help, like, what do you do with this dongle? Things like that. So I hope if you're interested, I hope you'll join us. There are 2 questions you have to answer because I moderate and I'm trying to keep the junk out, like people selling sunglasses and stuff got through occasionally. And Facebook now allows me to ask questions. Are you published? Are you doing school visits? If you don't answer the questions, I won't approve you because you might be a spam or a bot or whatever. So it's my way of keeping track. So make sure you answer those questions. Okay.
Excellent, excellent. So it is the Q&A portion now. If you have a question for Michelle, go ahead and use the button on the bottom of your screen, and we will go ahead and get started.
Jennifer, should I leave the screen share here, do you think, or should I click off of that?
Whatever you're comfortable with. You can click it off and just have it be your lovely face, or you can leave up to your screen.
Maybe I'll leave it in case people want to write stuff down. That would be maybe helpful.
Okay, so Sally asked, where do we find the list of standards that you referenced?
Oh, yes. It's a simple Google search on Common Core will land you there. I believe it's like ccss.org or something like that, but Common Core standards, you'll find it simply. And there's a button, it will say read the standards, and there'll be English language arts and there'll be math. You can click the button for the one that you want to see.
Okay. Let's combine some of these. So these 2 questions from Linda and from Noel are about the time of the visit. So one question is, how long does one school visit typically last? Like how many grades, how many classrooms, you know, as the whole visit?
A lot of that depends on you, honestly. There are some, I know I met someone this past weekend at NESCBWI who has physical limitations and really just can't manage more than a half a day. So she would only go in from like 9 to 12 and then that's all she can manage. Some people will do all day, 9 to 3 in elementary school or 7:30 to 2, whatever it will be in an upper middle school. It is more common in a middle school or a high school that programs would tend to be whole school or maybe half the school at a time, big programs, because scheduling in the way their schedules work is more complicated than in an elementary school where kids tend to stay in the same classroom all day. Elementary schools, typically, I think it's more common that they would be a full day visit, and then it would be the author, illustrator would do maybe, let's say, 3 sessions that are 45 minutes to an hour, or maybe 4 sessions. Like little kids tend to be shorter, like the K1-2s, your program, you don't want to go any more than 45 minutes because their attention spans are shorter. Something like that. I have heard there are some folks they're like, whatever you can cram in a day, I'll do it. So that might be 6 programs in a day. That might be shorter and they've got like a half-hour lunch. If you want to do that, you certainly can. Even as a former teacher, I wouldn't do that many because I feel like by the end, I'm just like brain dead and I wouldn't be delivering because you're doing the same thing over and over, remember, which gets a little like harder for you. The audience in front of you, it's all new for them, but you might be saying the same thing for the 6th time and you forget, what did I tell this group versus that group? Things like that happen.
So would you say that the average time for a presentation is about 45 minutes, you said?
Yes, I think that's kind of about the average, and they might be tweaked up or down, like, you know, for younger or older, depending. And sometimes you work with the school. They might say, with this group, I know half an hour is it with these kindergartners. They might have that sense of the kids and be able to tell you. Olders can certainly be an hour. You know, I would say 4th grade up through high school, it could be an hour, but make sure you're building in some kind of engagement. Maybe they're going to move a little or do something, some kind of physical something that they can move a little bit, because just sitting for a long time is hard.
Do the authors that you mentioned for the introvert extrovert section have their presentation methods on their websites?
They describe the content. I don't know if they actually say the details about introvert extrovert. That came from me asking them or seeing them present. I'm trying to think. I don't believe they do. There might be tidbits of information, like Sara LV will talk about props. Laurie Burns will talk about, I only do 3 programs in a day, things like that, but it's not articulated in quite the way I did it here, as far as I know.
I've heard authors say for the first 1, 2 or so visits, they don't charge until they get more gigs. What do you think of this?
I think that's a good plan. If you've never worked with kids or been in a school, you can do them for free. And one thing I strongly encourage people to do is like find a teacher in your town or someone, if you know a teacher, great. If not, find a teacher in your local school. Offer a free full school visit in exchange for their true and honest critique of your presentation. So it can't be someone who loves you and is going to tell you everything's perfect. And, you know, just like a critique group in writing. Ask them to really give you true feedback and tell you what isn't working, what worked great. And you'll get a sense too from the reactions of the crowd. But it's a good way to start. Make sure you tell them that that's what you're doing. Say, I'm doing this for free because, for example, I'm doing a discounted visit locally. I'm doing a free one at my kids' school. And I've told them it's because I'm a parent here. I'm doing it free as an offer for your school. The next town over, I had a relationship with already because I did something with the libraries in the past. So I said, I'd like to offer you a discount. I'm going to do 50% at your school. My usual rate is $800. I'll do it for $400 just because we have a relationship, but future visits would be regular fee. Make it clear that that's what you're doing. And they say, oh, that's so generous of you. But then they also understand that they should not be expecting author visits for free or very, very cheap, for example.
Okay. And Jenny asked, if you only do 1 program, how would you adjust the full day rate?
Oh, like you mean one session during the day? Is that what you mean?
I think that's what she means.
So I would say it's likely, it's to me, you're likely talking at least $250 to be walking through the door in most places. Now the Midwest, that might be a little bit lower because you saw those numbers I showed you. I don't have a lot of data on this yet, but based on my experience of talking to so many people, just getting there, you have to travel, you have to give up half your day. Even if 1 hour is not only 1 hour, right? It's the travel time to and from, it's the time prepping it and so forth. So I would say you're going to charge a portion of what your day rate is, but maybe it's like $250. It's like, it's not exactly split the day rate. You know, like let's say your day rate's 1,000, or let's say 900, make the numbers easy. Let's say your day rate's 900 and you normally do 3. You might not only split it to be a third, it might be that's a little more. Maybe it's not just 300, it's 350 or 400, if that's the level of rate you're charging at this point. You know, it's an exact science. You need to feel comfortable like you're compensated fairly without, you know, wringing them out too, obviously.
And are the fees different for higher education, high school, college? You know, do the fees vary depending on the kind of school that you're going to?
I don't have specific information about college. That's beyond what I've really paid close attention to. I would say high school, you're in the same ballpark. Yeah, it's all the people you'll see when you look at our data. We have it broken down by people who work, what kinds of books they write. That includes young adults in our data. And I can't off the top of my head tell you what that was, but if you look for that post, you'll see a lot of this broken down for you.
Lindsay asked, how important do you think study guides are to complement a program? As a storyteller, I made study guides and felt the teachers never used them. Do you feel it's different for this?
I wonder if she could type back to you in the chat box why you think that they weren't used. How do you know that they weren't used? Was one thing I'd asked. If you could answer that, I'll come back around to it and see if I get an answer. But I would say,
I think it was Lindsay, use the Q&A and just shoot us back another question about that.
Okay. I can answer some part of it. I think it's worth it to have something. I think it makes anything that can make a teacher's job easier to use your materials is beneficial. I can't comment whether they all go to it. I know that there are people who do use them. I see some of my former colleagues using some of those materials, but I don't. That's a tricky one. I think it's worth doing it, even if it may benefit you in terms of book sales. That teachers, librarians were like, "Ooh, look at these cool activities I can do with these curriculum guides if I buy that book." Or it might get your book used for a longer period of time with kids if it helps teachers have better ideas about how to use it. And I know it's going to lead to this question, like how do you develop a curriculum guide if you don't know how to do it, which is another whole thing. There are people you can hire for that job if you want to. Marty Kelley is one of the people I know who does it. There are a lot of people. I'm not saying anyone over another. Or you could, if you wanted, learn a little bit more about what those standards look like and make something yourself. For me as a teacher, like word searches and coloring sheets weren't something that I was looking for. So my guides won't ever have that, but there are sometimes teachers who are looking for those sorts of things too for an extra. So
okay.
Maybe think of something else that Marty Kelley does. What the question prompted me to think of this. Sends notification in advance that basically says, you know, please read my books before I get there. And please talk about the fact that I'm coming. And teachers, please stay in the room because my program is best if you can then carry it back to the classroom. And please don't be grading papers because you can't be paying attention. He finds a way to say this all nicely so people are not insulted by him saying it. But you will find it's not uncommon, unfortunately, to see teachers grading papers in a presentation. So figure out where you fall on that and whether you're going to call it out or address it up front or ignore it or what. But it does happen. And when I was teaching, I used to be so frustrated by it, but it does happen. Anyway, did Lindsay come back with more or did I answer the question?
She's not come back yet.
Okay.
So let's jump to another one. How do presentations differ from workshops? Are there elements of a workshop that teachers are expecting?
So presentation would be more like this, kind of what I might call like stand and deliver. Like, here's a bunch of stuff and here's about my process. A workshop would be much more engaging, which is how I like to do this as a workshop when I can. But that's not possible in a webinar, not really. But workshop for, let's say, revision workshop. You could ask kids to come to the workshop with, let's say, 2 paragraphs of something written down. Ideally, either double-spaced if they typed it, or if they're handwritten, by skipping lines, because it leaves room for them to write in between what they already have done. And then they can come to your workshop and you can put an example, let's say, of something you wrote and show how did you dig deeper to make that better. Maybe it's about word choice, like strong verbs or engaging nouns, or getting rid of the adjectives and adverbs, or bringing more vivid imagery or sound effects, whatever your particular niche that you want to talk about, and ask them to then apply that to the material they brought to the session. Of course, you need to be communicating a lot to make sure the kids actually have the writing done before you get there, if that's the kind of workshop you're going to do. Sometimes there'll be an author in residence where you might come for a week or maybe once a week for however many weeks, and you'll be with the same kids. I did something like this in a school where I was literally seeing the same kids multiple times. And I would just instead work them through the assignments. I would do some exercises with them, get some writing on paper, and then I would do a little mini lesson, like, here's how I could revise for this. And then we would apply it. And then the next time I'd do another little lesson on another kind of revision, and then they would apply it as they went on until they got to the end and then published what they had written. And I had worked, 3 different groups. I had kids who were more able, who wrote stories. And then my kids who were struggling a little more actually wrote poems, because it was easier for them to have that economy of language and not have to manage so many parts. So those are things you could do.
Okay, good ideas. Let's see here. Kathleen says, Michelle, super practical info. Just want folks to know that certified librarians are also go-to people in school districts as contact for school visits.
Yeah, sorry. I didn't put that on my slide, and you're 100% right, 100%. And I apologize for not putting that on the slide. Lots of places it's a librarian or a PTO. Occasionally it's a teacher, but you're right. I apologize for not including that.
And Lindsay got back to us and said that, yes, you answered her question. Thank you.
Okay, great. Great. Glad.
Mary asks, how do you feature the standards exactly? Are the standards part of your program descriptions or given to teachers during email conversations before hiring?
It's right on my website. So if you go, you'll see a little parenthetical thing that says, this program particularly addresses standard, whatever number I picked, I can't remember now. But I will address many standards, but the focus is this. And my primary focus is really on research for my current book. How I did research and digging deep into get good research to write good content after that. So I put it right on my website. Again, though, I'm a teacher, right? So it makes sense that that's what I'm doing. Don't feel you have to do that, but if you want to, just put it right in there. Then you don't have to have a lot of email and conversation. The more you can put on there that people know, the better, I would say. If you want to go that way, do it right on there.
Okay. And Donna says, when a nonfiction author is invited to present it at school, how would you suggest the presentation be balanced between expanded story and writing revision research process?
Could you read that again, please?
Yes. When a nonfiction author is invited to present at a school, how would you suggest the presentation be balanced between the expanded story and the writing revision research process?
I don't know how to answer that one in a general way, but hopefully if I describe mine, maybe that would help. So for Flying Deep, the structure of that manuscript came first, which is weird. Usually it's the last thing I figure out. But I was on a walk and I got the idea of a dive day, like, 8 o'clock you start and then 5 o'clock you come up, and what happens in the middle. So I had a built-in structure. And I went back and did research. So as I'm talking about building my narrative and doing my research, those things were going like all along the way together. So part of my presentation is to talk about that. I had the structure. I literally wrote a first draft that was like 500 words before I did a lick of research based on my memory of when I had a former pilot coming to talk to my students in my classroom. And I had loads of mistakes, but I had enough memory of the structure that I could write the draft. And then I went and did the research to figure out what the draft needed. And I wrote more drafts and more drafts and more drafts. And then eventually I got into Alvin and learned like, oh, I got that thing wrong. And I revised it some more and changed my narrative to include something new I learned that I hadn't realized might work. So I added something in after talking to the pilot that got in there. And some of it was key, such as one of the dangers of Alvin, one of the biggest threats to them, dangerous things, is fishing nets, anchor chains, and long line fishing lines that are on the bottom of the seafloor. That was not in my manuscript at all until I did the research. So they all kind of went together. So that's how it comes out in my presentation. Whereas another book that I have that's out on submission now, I just research. I can't find the story. Oh my gosh, what is the story? How am I going to get kids into the story? Like 2 years of this until finally I figured out something that I think works and got the narrative structure. So I would talk about actually how it went for me. I don't know if that's helpful or not. I'm sorry. It's a general way. I don't think there's a right answer, I guess, is also the answer.
We have a couple questions about Skype visits. Julia asked, do you have any tips for Skype visits? And Rajani, I hope I got your name right, said, what about Skype sessions? What are ideas to make them interesting, and do authors charge for these?
Yeah, lots of authors do Skype visits for free, especially as part of RAD, World Read Aloud Day. I did that this year. So when I did RAD, I screen shared my book and read it to the class. And then I told them some little tidbits of things after. And so that's one option. Another option is something a little more interactive. I tried it in a class. These were adults though. They were adults. And I had a teacher on the other end who was helping me. So we did a writing exercise together, and the teacher on the other end scribed it. So she was writing down what they did. We were writing poems together. I was like really the facilitator, and it worked better than I had thought it would. I was surprised. But there were a couple things I learned, which is I needed the teacher on the other end to come up close and say into the microphone what was being called out from across the room, because the microphone wouldn't pick it up well enough. And I needed the teacher to scribe it. And what happened is she scribed over there, and then I over here also wrote it down so I could see. And then we worked through reorganizing the lines and crafting a poem together. And I could see that I could do that. I could do that with fourth graders, fifth graders, sixth graders as well, as long as I had an adult on the other end. I Skyped with Matthew Winter's class, and we had a more informal question and answer type of thing back and forth with his kids. He had fourth graders there. So that's how I would do it. Now, what to charge? This is also in our data set. We have information about people charging. Many people do charge for visits that are 45 minutes long, let's say. And I don't know those numbers off the top of my head. I don't want to say something that's an incorrect number, but if you look for that coming, you'll see it in our data. I'm sorry to make you come back for it. It's not quite there yet.
And Michelle, if you could share that once you have everything, shoot me a message, let me know. Then for all the members watching, we will make sure to get that message out to you guys.
Oh yeah. Can there be like a show notes, or I don't know, does it work like that? You can put something below? Okay, perfect.
Yep.
To you then. But if you want it sooner, it will be on my website, as I said.
Okay. Let's see here. How do you suggest handling book sales on a visit?
Oh, yes. So there are several ways to do this. My personal preference is let a local bookstore handle it. So the advantage to doing it that way is it counts in your sales numbers. If you, the author, purchase your book directly from your publisher and sell it, it does not count in your sales numbers, but you get the profit. So if you get your book for 50% off, and then you sell it, you get to keep all the profit. So you make the profit there, but it doesn't go in your sales numbers. There is a workaround for this, which is an organization called, I think it's Author. I meant to double check this before we got on the webinar. It's in our Facebook group, and there's a whole page about how it works, a place where authors can buy the books from them at a discounted rate, but it does still count in your sales numbers. I have not done this. I cannot speak from experience, but there are many people in our Facebook group who have done it and have raved about it. So a couple of things. If you live nearby the school and can easily get back there, I strongly encourage you to send book sale stuff home after your visit because you will sell more books. Kids meet you, they get fired up, and then they want the book. So if you're able to get back in there and sign them later, do it that way. If you really are concerned about selling a lot of books. If not, if you're traveling, whatever, I would have the school send a flyer home in advance of your visit, collect all that information, and then you can have the books. Often you could have them drop shipped to the school, or if you maintain your own stock, you could bring them with you. Or like I said, you can just simply ask an indie bookstore to handle the sales for you. It's my preferred method because you need to be careful. You need to be paying taxes if you sell books in whatever state you're in. You need to know the laws and how to handle all that. And I'm a writer. I'm not a good math person. I don't want to have to handle all those things. But that's not that that's right or wrong. That's working with my personality.
We have a couple more questions about fees.
Okay.
This one is, when you do artists in residence, how do you structure your fees?
That one's a little trickier because you're really, often what I do is I would offer a discount for multiple days being booked or multiple schools being booked. So I would look at something like that as a possibility. A lot of the time what happens, a lot of the time in Massachusetts, what happens is that a school will get some sort of grant and they're looking for someone and they maybe already know what their budget number is. Like, this is it. We have this much to hire you and you can decide whether you want to do it or not. But let's say you charge $1,000 a day. I'm just going to pick an easy number. Asking them to pay you $1,000 a day for 5 days is a lot of money. So then think about, okay, how far is it from my home? How much is it worth it to me to discount it? Could I say discount, 20% per day? Is that okay? Am I going to feel comfortable with that? Is that going to help them? Can they still pay that number? Or if it's close enough to you, could it be that you're just doing mornings and charging half-day rates and you're only going in the morning or the afternoon, whatever it would be? That one's a little trickier. And I'll be honest, we did not survey on that data point because we had so much to ask and we wanted people to fill out the survey, and we also needed to be able to manage the data, and we're just two volunteers who couldn't handle breaking it down so far. That's the best I could say right now on that. I hope that helps a little bit. It's not as common because it's a budgetary issue of trying to have them come back that many times.
Yes. Donna says, how would you suggest fee structures for presenting to large assemblies rather than smaller groups?
Yeah. If you're doing a large whole school assembly, likely that's going to be probably 2, unless it's a tiny school. But a lot of times it ends up, you got half the school at one time and half. So you're basically talking a half day. So I would say, let's say your day rate is $1,000. Your half day rate is, $700 maybe, something like that. Because as we talked about, it's not only half the work and half the time. This is where it comes into a little bit of your comfort level and how far you're traveling, and where you live, or where the school is that you're visiting, not so much where you live, where the school is. And if you're traveling, we didn't talk about this at all, but if you're traveling somewhere, like my website states, if it's more than 50 miles from my home, there'll be travel fees involved. And that I handle just directly with the person once we know where it is. It might be that I'm charging mileage if I'm driving, or that they need to put me up in the hotel if it's too far for me to reasonably get to a school first thing in the morning, things like that. I put that separate, and I do that for 2 reasons. 1, it's clear what I'm being paid for the day, but 2, it's not compensation. It doesn't get mixed up in your tax monies because paying for your hotel room isn't paying you. So if you roll it into your fee, it looks like you got paid more than you actually did. They're just covering your hotel. That's another thing, and I'm not a tax person, but that's another reason you might want to keep things separate. Okay. Talk about that.
Good tips. We have one more question.
Okay.
This is, do high school visits have different pitfalls as far as keeping the kids engaged?
I would say yes and no. The whole thing is, no matter who you're talking to, the same thing applies. You want to connect with them. You want to connect in some way. So older kids, you have to be careful sometimes that you're not saying something that can get misconstrued or something like that. I'll give an example of what I mean. I once was talking to some junior high students about these backpacks that were available for checkout from the library, and one was about maple syrup, and you could tap a tree to get maple syrup, and there was a screwdriver. Hey boy, all sorts of off-color things being said in the audience by those students. I didn't say it in the next presentation. I showed them a different bag. Just like stuff like that can happen. That's not going to happen with 8-year-olds. But really, to just be genuine, be yourself, bring yourself to the school, I think are the best things. And what else would I say about high school? Talking more about your life as a writer maybe might be interesting for the kids in the room who are wanting to be writers or illustrators, things like that. Talking to them as more like, they're almost grown-ups. So talking to them, don't make sure you're not talking down to them. That you can't do that to any age range, but high school is just like, you're all done if you're talking down like they don't know something. That's my best advice, I think. I'm sorry, it's not more specific.
No, excellent advice, as was this whole webinar. Very good tips, very practical advice. So thank you very much, Michelle, for your time today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. If you want to go back and look at this recording and look at some of her slides, we will have this recording up on the Authors Guild website in a few days, so you can check back if you want to view it again. So thank you, Michelle.
Great. Thank you.
Right. Bye-bye.